I'm also I'm going to mute all background noise. And we can start with the overview, which is on 134 in the books. And I'll share. Okay. It says, Aaron is commanded to raise light in the lamps of the menorah. They're being particular because the Torah uses peculiar language. It doesn't say to kindles, to raise light. It's not today's topic, but I'm just explaining why they use a weird expression. And the tribe of Levi is initiated into the service in the sanctuary. They were the public servants. Further on in the Torah portion, we're introduced to a second Passover, which we have once discussed here, which is and we'll explain it now. Second Passover is instituted. This is the second, as the Jews have entered their second year in the desert. In other words, they begin with the Exodus on Passover. Now it's the first anniversary of Passover, beginning their second year. And why? And is instituted in response to petition. Why should we be deprived? What does that have to do with it? And we are going to be talking about this today. There's a group of Jews who were unable to bring the Passover offering in its appointed time because they were ritually impure. Without getting into all the details of ritual impurity, because most of it is not relevant today, but in order to go into the temple to eat from sacred foods, one could not have touched a corpse, or actually been in close contact with the dead, touched a dead animal. There were different things where a person would be considered in off their spiritual balance, and they had to wait 7 days or more sometimes, go to the mikveh, and then they would be able to go to the temple. Okay. God instructs Moses on the procedures. So because that, just to fill out, because they don't go out, on that first Passover, there were some people who were not able to bring the offering. So they said to Moses, what about us? He says, bring a Passover. The first Passover wasn't when they were in Egypt and about to leave. Now there's another Passover. They said, but we're not ritually pure. So Moses says, that's a great question. Says, let me check with the boss. Goes to God. God says, 30 days after Passover, there'll be a second Passover. There'll be another opportunity to bring the Passover offering, to have the Passover experience at the temple in the morning. And then anybody will be able to do it, even if they, in the words of the Torah, even if they were out of town, or if they were out of town, or they were ritually impure, or whatever it may be. Okay. God instructs Moses on the procedures for Israel's journeys and encampments in the desert, and the people in journey information from Mount Sinai, where they have encamped for nearly a year. Next, again, we're not dealing with any of this. I'm just giving you an overview of what's in it. The Torah portion, you show up in Shul on Saturday, you could hear the whole deal. The people are dissatisfied with their bread from heaven, the manna, and the men that Moses supplied them with meat. Moses appoints 70 elders to whom he imparts of his spirit to assist him in the burdening of governing the people. At the very end of the Torah, Miriam, Moses' brother, speaks negatively of Moses because she felt that he wasn't giving his wife enough attention because he was all engaged with God and the people, and she is punished with leprosy for speaking Lashon Hara. Moses prays for her healing, and the entire community waits 7 days for her recovery. Okay, what we're going to be talking about today is lessons from the experience, the saga that went on, which is not fully, as we see, fully spelled out in the Torah, about that first anniversary of the Passover. In other words, their second Passover, as they're going to their second year in the desert, and these people who can't partake because they were at a funeral, whatever. So, as I've done a few times this year, because this year this course is focusing on Rashi, the primary commentary on the Torah, and getting into Rashi's thinking, which is a great thing. I'd like to, in order to give us greater context, I often want to start from the lesson and then back into how we see it from Rashi. So this one, I think it's also best to do that. And I'm going to start off from text 7, which is 143. Now, what is text 7? Let me give you some background. God, when God gives the Torah, God gives us a bunch of different things to do. They're obviously all important. And if it's important to God, it's important to us. First of all, they're commandments, not suggestions. And God took us out of Egypt, and God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai, and we're not wondering whether there's a God, and we understand there's our Creator. And if our Creator says, light Shabbos candles, well, light Shabbos candles. That's the way it is. That our Creator also speaks about offerings, which are called sometimes sacrifices. I prefer the translation of offerings, and those are the Hebrew word, which is korban, actually means to come close. Karov means to come close. A relative is a karov. Being next to someone is being karov to them. They were not just offerings, like the pagans used to do with animals or whatever it was. There was a profound spiritual exercise, which is hard for us to conceptualize, at least for me, in my 20th century or 21st century way of thinking. But it was a very profoundly important and esoteric closeness exercise. One of the things where the Torah, God speaks and imparts to the Jews how important it is that it uses the language. The Torah uses the language quite a bit when it comes to these offerings. That is it would, the way you would translate it is that it's a pleasing aroma, just because the words that are used are kind of hard to understand. Rashi explains, because God doesn't have olfactory. God, it's not like something that smells good to God, or God's God. Rashi, based on the rabbis of the Talmud, explains that the odd language, which is usually translated as a pleasing aroma, it comes from the word nachas. Nachas, your grandparents told you, nachas means pleasure, but a deep pleasure. So he says that it's nachas for me. The words that we translate as pleasing aroma is meant to imply that God says, I get tremendous nachas when I ask you to do something, you do it. So in other words, what the Jews have been told is that bringing an offering gives God nachas. That's beautiful. It's not just that we're saying, well, there's God, and God took us out of Egypt, and God created the world, and God gives us life, and God wants me to put up a mezuzah. I'm going to put up a mezuzah. This adds a layer. It says, even though I'm infinite, and you're a tiny, finite speck of humanity, when you do something, a mitzvah of mine, I, God, the infinite, get nachas. I get joy out of what you do. Based on this, in general, our approach, the Torah approach, is that whenever we offer ourselves to God, it's very special to God. So let's say I came in, I was raised with mezuzahs, I have a mezuzah, I put it in, I make a bracha, I do it. It's a cosmic thing, it's a mitzvah. But let's say, I want to do today's not convenient for me. Or I don't really. It's still too expensive. It's expensive for me. $60. I don't want to put up a mezuzah. And I say to myself, it's not about me. It's about what I'm needed for. And if God wants a mezuzah, I'm going to offer myself and my comfort, or my assets, or whatever it is, and my time, and I'm giving that up to God. Then that is seen as an offering. We don't bring offerings today, but I'm offering of myself. I'm giving myself to God. In those days, they had to bring as an animal. It was expensive, and a person brought that. And in the cases where it's either all burned or them and the Cohens are eating it, I get nothing out of it. I can't even have dinner from it, in many of the cases. And here I'm giving it up because God wants it. That idea of doing something which doesn't feel totally convenient for us and comfortable for us, but we're doing something for something higher than us, and if they're for God, that gives God nachas. So the model is this idea of the offering, which was where the Torah uses it explicitly, that's where it starts. But for our times where none of us are bringing offerings, we do bring offerings. When we do something of giving of our own comfort, our own time, our own effort, our own means, in the case in a way that is which is something that's not what I would instinctively like to do. I'm giving something to God, and the Torah says God gets nachas. I am delighted. God gets delight. I'm delighted when I speak and my will is done. Okay, so this is a Torah idea of when we do something, a mitzvah, we extend ourselves to God, we give God delight, and the model comes from the idea of the offering. Let's expand that a little bit.
In other words, altruism.
Altruism, yes. In other words, and altruism is a big word, and some people might wonder whether they, how complete the altruism should be. The idea is that we're extending ourselves for God. I remember many years ago, someone who doesn't live here anymore, but I'm still in touch with him, said to me that he he would love to keep kosher. He has kosher in his house, but outside he doesn't keep kosher. It's much too difficult. So I said to him, you work in Manhattan. It's not like you're in Idaho. It's possible. He says, yeah, it's not easy. So I get you. How about Wednesdays? So he says, I only have to keep kosher Wednesdays? I said, I didn't say that. But keep kosher Wednesdays. Try. Do Wednesdays. See if it works. He says, Wednesdays I can do. And then eventually, whether it expanded. But the point is that it's what was special about it. He was taking something and saying, okay, I'm going to inconvenience myself for God. And that's not easy. But Wednesdays was his offering day. So here, look, if you look in text 9, it said, because I skipped 8 for a reason. We should cut it, which is so on page. We'll get back to 8 later. Text 9, 145. We should contemplate the great kindness of the Creator. He made it so that the tiniest of insignificant beings, the human, can bring inordinate delight to the most eminent and great God, of whom it is said his greatness cannot be fathomed. This is from the previous Rebbe, and he was actually a very eloquent and vivid writer. And he, in this piece, and as in other ones, he's bringing to mind to think that we, each of us individually, we get up in the morning, we have the ability and opportunity to give infinite, what does it call it? Inordinate delight to the infinite. Most of us think, what do I have to do with an infinite being? Why would I matter to an infinite being? Most people say, why do I matter? God says, you're right, intrinsically, you don't matter. But I say you matter. You matter to me. And what you do matters to me. And when you do something special and you give yourself over to me, I love it. And so we have the ability to give God nachas, delight. So this causes us, the previous Rebbe continues, to be perpetually excited to carry out the divine service with an eager heart and willing spirit. If you think of someone who you really respect, someone of global import, someone you don't know, and that person, you got a message, that person needs something in Somerset Hills, and if you did this, you went to this place and you deliver this for him, you'd be doing me a great favor, and I will be very, very happy. Most of us would be delighted for the opportunity. Now we have a connection with that person. Now that's a very special person. Think of whoever you want. Normally I would say the president, but I'm not going to start with that one. But it's somebody very special. What?
Depending which country.
I can't even talk about the chair of the UN. Everything today is difficult. But the chief rabbi of Israel, one of the chief rabbis, said, "Do me a favor. You don't even know his name, perhaps. But it says if you do this, I will really appreciate it. You get a thank you letter from him. And if you're ever in Israel, Janice, if you're ever in Israel, say, I know that guy. Well, you don't really know the guy. You just he delivered a letter for him. But the fact is, it's something, there's a connection. We're reading on 145, text 9. So this causes us to be perpetually excited to carry out the divine service in the eager heart and willing spirit. So here's the idea: is that, and this is really the point of the lesson, is that when we think about the idea that we're very finite and God is infinite, and we have the ability today, even by taking out time on a Sunday morning, nice day, catch some tennis or golf, later it's going to rain, you're giving up valuable time, and you came because you want to study Torah, that's an offering. And what do we say? That this is something that creates great nachas, delight, joy within God. If we process that and we feel that, it gives us an excitement. That, my gosh, I'm able to get a rise out of the infinite. That's gewaldig. If you look at text 10, this is from the founder of the Chassid movement, the Baal Shem Tov. It says, if we genuinely believe that God cares for our efforts, we'll be ecstatic to serve God. And many people in my life have said to me, why should God care? I think that's a totally legitimate question. Because God cares what I'm having for lunch. He had nothing better to do. I mean, and the idea the Torah says is God, and God's attention can be everywhere. And yes, God does care what we're having for lunch, and God does care what we're doing and how we're living our lives. And that means prayer can be real because we're actually talking to someone, to God who's listening. And the idea that God cares, and when we do something special, God has joy, God has delight, God has nachas. So he says, then that itself will give us joy in our service. This is especially true when we contemplate the words of King Solomon, says the Baal Shem Tov. There's a verse in Song of Songs, your lips drip flowing honey, O bride, because Song of Songs is like a love story. It's framed as a love story between man and woman. It's a metaphor between us and God, or us and the Torah, us and Jewish life, the love we can feel. Now, even if we like being Jewish and we're good with it, I don't think it's not love in the sense we would think about it as the love of a human being. But we want to try and see that there's actually, we can inspire, people can feel real emotion saying, I want to do this. By doing this, I'm making God happy. By doing this, I'm connecting with a loved one, God. That's it. We can feel some real emotion, which are based on the words of his father, King David. If you lie between lips, I don't think they should have translated this because it's the Baal Shem Tov is making a play on words of something in a verse in the Psalms. But the main thing is we want to say is that it's like kissing on the lips. God awaits with diligence to kiss our lips when we speak the words of Torah and pray with love and reverence for God, because we're using our lips to do something, to praise God, and God kisses us on the lips, and otherwise God embraces us, or whatever you want to say. The main thing is that we know God loves us, and now if we can inspire a desire for connection with God, and we do something to tighten that connection, to strengthen our bond with God. God said, put up a mezuzah or whatever it may be. It's not just that I'm following orders, I'm doing something for a loved one. And as the Torah is saying, when it comes to offerings, God has nachas. Think a great being, this infinite being who there's no path of connection. When we do a mitzvah, when we offer ourselves to God, and we stretch ourselves for God, then it gives God nachas. And go to text 11. This is from the founder of Chabad. When we do what God desires, and text 11 is, 146. When we do what God desires, our godly soul, along with our animating soul, and all their garments become fully attached to God's supernal will and infinite blessed light. When we do God's will, it's not just our higher self, our whole persona is connected with God. In God's sphere, this attachment is eternal because God and his will transcend the limitations of time. So anytime we do something with God, for God, there's this connection that's eternal. So what Rabbi Zalman in his what it was he's developing in the book is called Tanya, the foundational book of Hasidic thought, is that if you think over generations, and he says this, people are forced to choose. Unfortunately, so many times in our history, choose between the crucifix and death, or between accepting Islam and death. And many people will say, I can't do that. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of people over there. It's like I think of Daniel Pearl. I don't know what was going through his head. He said, I'm a Jew. I was born as a Jew and I'll die as a Jew. Whatever he said. The Rabbi Zalman suggested that no Jew really wants to be disconnected from God. We want to live our lives, and we figure God understands. But if we look at every opportunity, not that someone's threatening us, or say, here's an opportunity for me to either embrace God or turn my back on God, it's a big thing. Yeah, we think, oh, God will understand. I think God does understand. But the idea is that if we think that every moment and every opportunity is actually precious, it's a big deal. If I decide to be able to, to put up that mezuzah or to light the Shabbos candles or whatever it is, it's a big deal. And it's a choice of whether I'm tightening the connection or weakening it. So then when we tighten it, we'll be very happy, because when we tighten, we know God has nachas. Okay. So now, having given that as a backdrop, that when we do a mitzvah for God, when we're extending ourselves, it is it gives God nachas, and the Torah model for that was the offerings that God told the Jews to bring, because that's where God uses the language. I have nachas when you do my will, and it's because they extended themselves. Now let's sticky note that, and now let's go to look at the Torah portion to try to understand what went on in the Torah portion. First thing we're going to talk about, text 2a. And I mentioned this in the overview, but let's go through it again. So just let's remember, the Jews leave Egypt on Passover. That's what we celebrate every year. 7 weeks later, they get to Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, they're there for several months before Moses comes down with the second tablets, because they get the first tablets, and then there's Moses breaks the tablet because of the golden calf, and Moses goes up and down the mountain for 40 days and 40 days and 40 days, comes down Yom Kippur, starting Shavuos, which was the last week. They don't get the second tablets till Yom Kippur. After Yom Kippur, God says, build a tabernacle. The day after Yom Kippur, opening day of the tabernacle, is 2 weeks before the first anniversary of Passover. They are still at Mount Sinai. Mountains over there. Jews are camped. They're doing their thing. They built the tabernacle. Now the first anniversary of Passover comes. When, just a fun fact, when God initially tells the Jews to do the Passover, it says it's for this year, and then when you come to Israel. So they're still in the desert. They really don't think that they're going to do Passover. It's supposed to be when they come to Israel. But God says, this year, first I want you to do it. They didn't do it again in the desert. They did not have the Passover offering, celebrate Passover again until they came to Israel, 39 years later. Yeah. God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the second year of their exodus from the land of Egypt, right? So it's the beginning of the second year, in the first month, saying it's 2 weeks before Passover now, and they're before the Passover anniversary. And he says, you know something? The children of Israel should make the Paschal lamb at its appointed time. Do it. I told you we could go to Israel. I make the rules here. This year you're going to do it. Now, it's interesting, because we're going to talk about it later. The Torah uses odd language when it comes to offerings. Usually say it is a language to offer something, offer the Paschal lamb. It says make the Paschal lamb. No, let's do it. On the afternoon of the 14th of this month, you should make it, which is Passover. You should make it, again, you make it at its appointed time in accordance with all its statutes and ordinances. Do it. Do the whole thing the way I told you to. Last year, do it again. Make it. God spoke to the children of Israel, instructing them to make the Paschal lamb. So on the first month, on the afternoon of the 14th day of the month, which is every year, that's Passover. Passover is the 15th of Nisan, and the 14th day, the Erev Pesach, the day before Pesach, is when we do the Passover offering. They made the Paschal lamb in the Sinai desert, according to all that God had commanded Moses. So did the children of Israel do. Now, that's this week's Torah portion. Let's take it a little bit further. Also in this week's Torah portion. What happened, the saga that we mentioned before? Some men were ritually unclean because of contact with a dead person. As I mentioned before, there's laws of purity and impurity, which mostly don't apply today, but when dealing with the temple, the tabernacle, eating sacred foods, one had to be ritually balanced. And let's say go and come in contact with the dead, which is a big mitzvah, taking care of the dead. But the fact is, because God is life, and the contact with the dead it throws us off. Person couldn't go into the temple unless they waited a prescribed time. They went to the mikveh, and then they were able to go to the temple or to eat from sacred foods. Now, they just buried someone. They didn't do anything wrong. They did something good. But now they could not make the Paschal lamb on that day. So they approached Moses and Aaron on that day because we still didn't go to the mikveh. You have to wait 7 days. What are we going to do? Those men said to Moses, we are ritually and clean because of contact with that person. Why should we be excluded so as not to offer a sacrifice to God in its appointed time with all the children of Israel? Now they use the term sacrifice, an offering. God was the whole time saying, make this is not something that's a tremendous question, but it is odd, and it's going to be important to understand, and the Rebbe's understanding of how this all is unpacked. They're using the language of making. See, you could not make the Paschal lamb on that day in verse 6. But then, now it says, why are we included not to offer a sacrifice in its appointed time with the children of Israel? Ultimately, as I say, the story ends well. God gives them another 30 days. They can have the offering. But there are some questions about the story. Number one, this is a great Sephardic authority, Rabbi Elio Mizrahi, and he has a commentary on the Torah, commentary on Rashi. He asks, how could they ask this question? Which is page 139. How could they ask a question like that? They understood if people who are touched the Jews didn't just get the Torah yesterday; they have it for a year. They know that to eat sacred food, to bring offerings, you can't have had done right after a funeral. So why are they asking that question? Why should we be different? Why should we be different? Because you just by a funeral, you get a brownie button. It's great, it's wonderful, but now you don't have the ritual purity. How could they ask those questions? How had they not yet heard the instructions about banning the ritually impure from the camp? Of course they did. After all 8 sets of instructions were given to Moses that day, one of which was about the banishment of the impure. It was being banishment. In other words, they can't come into the temple. So what into the sanctuary, into the tabernacle. So what don't they understand? So that's one big question. And if we look at in Rashi says, he expands a little bit what went on. It says they came to Moses and they asked, text 4, why should we lose out? And Moses told them sacrifices can be offered in a state of impurity. Which question is, why didn't they know that? And they said to Moses, let ritually clean priests offer it, sprinkle the blood for us on the altar, and then we'll eat the meat in a state of ritual impurity. Then we can eat the meat. But why should they be able to eat meat in ritual impurity? So we know you don't eat sacred foods in a state of ritual impurity. Why are they even asking the question? So here is how the Rebbe interpreted all of this. So a brilliant parsing of it. Look at text 5. What went on there? It says, if you follow the Torah's literal meaning, the Paschal lamb they brought the previous year in Egypt did not have the status of an offering. Let's go back to the original Passover offering. Jews are slaves. There's no sanctuary. There's no tabernacle. There's no holy foods. There's nothing. God says, Moses says, God's going to take us out. They have almost a year of the Egyptians getting whacked by different plagues, the whole Seder thing. Then he says, on the night of the 14th of the month, I want you to bring an offering, a lamb, and I want you to have dinner. I want you to eat. You're going to have the first Seder. They're going to bring a lamb. That's the Paschal lamb. They ate the lamb with matzah, with maror. That's what the Torah describes. That's not, to them, that's not an offering. It's holiday lunch. It's lamb. What's the big? It's not an offering. It's food. We like lamb. Good. So in their minds, the offerings that God had been talking about, different things, ritual, that's one thing. But Passover, we have Passover dinner. Matzah, maror, and lamb. The Paschal lamb that the Jews were instructed to bring in Egypt was a unique mitzvah. They were to slaughter a lamb, roast it, and eat it on the night of Passover together with matzah and maror. That was the extent of the mitzvah. They weren't instructed to bring a sacrifice to God. It was eating dinner. But it's God says, have roast beef or brisket. If he says so, that's it. Okay, so it's a brisket. But God said to have the brisket. God gave us the menu. You can have the brisket too, but first you have to have the lamb. And so it wasn't in the ritual. There were no offerings at that time. So the idea of an offering, they're not thinking this is the first anniversary. They're not thinking about the Passover meal as being an offering. This is why the Torah describes the Paschal offering brought in Egypt as a slaughtering rather than an offering. It does not call it an offering. It's called a slaughter. You slaughter a lamb to eat it. And why in the Torah it kept pointing out, it says to make the Passover, well, not to offer the Passover, because it's to make lunch, make dinner. We're going to make the holiday dinner. The holiday dinner has a menu. It has matzah and maror, and Baruch Hashem, it has some meat on it, as we have lamb. And it says you should say it is a Paschal offering. The word slaughtering does not pertain specifically to an offering to God. Every animal that is slaughtered to be eaten is called a slaughtering. So, in their minds, they're thinking, okay, let's get before we go to text 6. These guys they had a funeral. They did something right. They know that right now they're not going to be able to go into the temple, sacred foods, but it doesn't really matter. But it's Passover. They're going to be able to celebrate Passover. Just because they went to a funeral doesn't mean they can't. They buried, and in this case, they buried someone who had no one else to bury them. It's a big mitzvah. So now they go home. They're getting prepared for the first anniversary of Passover. Of course, we're going to celebrate Passover. We're going to eat matzah. We're going to eat maror, and we're going to eat the lamb. What is having the funeral have to do with anything with Passover? So,
okay, quick question.
Yeah.
The group of people who've requested the lamb. Okay, at this point, they're still ritually impure. When do they get purified and how?
It's in this case they would have to wait 7 days and go to the mikveh. That's it. But they didn't have the time because it was just yesterday. So when God says you can do it in 30 days from now, they'll be fine. They just got to stay away from funerals for a few weeks. So, but in their head, it was a legitimate question. Rabbi Mizrahi, we mentioned before, he's saying, oh, what kind of question is that? If you read the Torah, you know that when a person is ritually impure, they can't have sacred foods. In their minds, it wasn't sacred foods. It was the Passover dinner. There's nothing wrong with that. They can eat the matzah, they can eat the maror. Why can't they eat the lamb? So to continue this text 6, the Paschal lamb they brought in Egypt was not a sacred offering to God and wasn't placed on an altar. It was a standalone mitzvah to slaughter and eat the Paschal lamb. This led the people who were impure to suppose that the new status added to the Paschal lamb after the tabernacle was erected was layered on top of the original status. It didn't negate or even diminish the original mitzvah of eating the lambs they did the previous year. Why would the new status negate or even alter the original status, namely the mitzvah to eat the Paschal lamb? In other words, if now you're saying, okay, now that we have a tabernacle, you want to slaughter in the temple. Okay, slaughter in the temple, but if you bring it, I'm going to eat it. If I can't go into the temple to be part of the service, but I'll bring it out to me and I'll eat it. They thought the Paschal lamb now 2 independent sets of status, one layered over the other. It was an offering to God on the altar to serve as a memorial and expression of gratitude to God for the exodus from Egypt, which didn't happen the first Egypt Passover, but okay, now apparently that's going to happen because we have a tabernacle, as the passage states, and got passed over. And B, the mitzvah of eating the Paschal lamb on the eve of the 15th of the month. This was not considered eating an offering. It was like the mitzvah of eating matzah and maror, so you have lamb too. So it was a totally legitimate question where they come and say, last year we ate it, and there wasn't any problem if whether we went to the mikveh or not. We want to eat it now. You're preparing it in the tabernacle. God bless you. It's very special, but still I can eat it. And that's why they said, let the Kohen do the whole deal. The priest do then sprinkle the blood and then bring it out and we'll eat it. But when they understood that the Paschal lamb was essentially an offering to God, and they understood, because they had already gotten this instructions from the Torah, that an offering to God brings nachas to God. From the language, as it says, a pleasing aroma, but the idea is, as Rashi said before, it brings special delight to God when we extend ourselves to God, and the model is the offering. Then it became the most important motive for partaking. But they're thinking about it. They're saying, 1 second. Pesach we like, it's a mitzvah. But to being part of an offering, we want that. They were incomparably more excited about the opportunity to bring God an offering at the right time than about performing a mitzvah through the eating the Paschal lamb. Because that to them, that was now the model. You can give God nachas. And the model that God said is by giving me offerings. He didn't say that yet about eating making a seder. He said it's about the offering. So then they said, what's Pesach aside? We want to be part of this offering. Giving God what he termed my sustenance, my fire. That God says that you're nourishing me by bringing an offering. Brings about what God termed my fire, the aroma of my delight to God. To be the source of God's delight was the greatest delight and is the greatest delight of every Jew. So what the point here, as the Rebbe is reading it, because our question was just to understand what's going on there, because you have an offering, they're impure, they couldn't get it, tough, catch it next year. I mean, it just, those are the rules. The Rebbe explains why they thought they were able to eat it, but something else. Since, again, we have to bridge how they thought and how we think. To us, there are no offerings. We don't bring animals as offerings, and we probably can't even conceptualize it. But when the Torah was presented, that was the model of extending yourself, stretching yourself to do something for God and give God what we call nachas. Today, we give those offerings in different ways. In the way we look at our lives, and we say, that would be a sacrifice for me. That's not so simple for me, but I'm going to offer up my effort to God. I'm going to do something. I'm going to go the extra mile for God. That gives God tremendous nachas. The model of that to them in the desert is the offering. So now their original thought is, we're going to have Passover. We want to have matzah and maror. We want to have a Paschal lamb. What's the problem? When Moses starts explaining to them that this actually has offering status, and that's why it's a problem, then they get really excited. No, we want it. It's not just that we want to have Passover with our families. You can have Passover with your families, but we want to be part of the offering because we've heard that through an offering to God, that's what gives God nachas. So the bottom line of this whole story in the Rebbe's presentation is these people and the excitement they had and the allure they saw in an exercise where we say, this will give God nachas. And we say, this will give God nachas. That's something very special. And again, like I said before, if you can imagine someone in the world where it would be very special to you, that person, that you did something that made them feel good and made them feel grateful. And then you'd say, if you had an opportunity, it would make you feel good. You would feel good that you made them feel good. We have that opportunity with the infinite of God. We don't have offerings, but we don't have the offerings of the Torah, but we have offerings every day of how we can offer of ourselves to God and give of ourselves and give God nachas that way. So if you look at the key points.
Right, so
Good.
I want to make sure I get.
Go,
the
please,
answer
please,
to
please.
story.
Good.
So the people who were impure.
Yeah.
They weren't able to make the offering, they had to wait for the second Passover, or what?
Correct.
That's what happened.
That's correct. But when they heard that, so one way of reading it,
They weren't able to eat the Paschal lamb.
either. So, but initially, the way you usually read it, say God says they can't do it. The law says that God doesn't have to say. They already had laws. They can't partake of it, and now they're saying, well, that's not fair. It's not fair. But those are the rules. It wasn't. They asked a very good question. They said it's not really. It's not even an offering. It's lunch. It's dinner. So why don't you let us have it? When Moses said, no, this has the status of an offering, that's when they really wanted it. Because they wanted to be able to have an opportunity to do something that the Torah describes as giving nachas to God. But initially, they were not able to eat it. They had an opportunity for a second Passover, so I'm sure they were okay. They had a consolation prize.
In 39 years.
What?
In 39 years.
No, 30 days later.
Okay.
Makeup day.
There was a makeup day, 30 days later. And then there was no Passover at all for offering. Nobody had the opportunity. So I don't think anybody was a sore loser there because there was no winners. But for this one, people had the opportunity for a Passover offering. They thought it was about having a Seder with lambs, and why not? But then when Moses explains to them that there's a ritual significance to it, and that's why not. That's when they really wanted it. No, if this is an offering and this is what we say gives God nachas, we don't want to be excluded. And God rewarded them with that.
By giving them accelerated way to cleanse themselves.
No, by giving them 30 days later. So there's only 7 days they have to wait.
Yeah, but you said the cleansing usually 7 days. This time was 3 days.
No,
Still 7 days.
7 days, but it was 30 days later.
Yeah.
So they were going to be in good shape as long as they didn't have another funeral. So, but the idea is the excitement and the enthusiasm of these people. Not just okay, I can't. So I'll buy myself lamb anyway. Is that it wasn't about the lamb? The excitement to be able to give God nachas, and we can. And that's the lesson here is not about what happened there. It's lessons for us here today. Every one of us has the opportunity to give God nachas, do something, and we do something which is beyond our comfort level for God.
So outside of Moses, nobody knew that the Paschal lamb, was actually ritual as opposed to usual.
I'm not saying that that no one knew, no, because Moses, no, they didn't. They had a different take on it because they remembered last year, because the first Paschal lamb was it was dinner,
Right.
or a late lunch. Okay.
So as much as anything else, it's really a statement that they are rejoining the community.
Correct, but the primary theme of this is the enthusiasm they had when they learned that this is something that would give God nachas, and they couldn't get it, so they pushed, and God rewarded their enthusiasm by saying, okay, if you really want it that much, come back in 30 days. Because he was rewarding their enthusiasm, that they wanted an opportunity to give God nachas. Key points. When God instructed Jews to bring a Paschal lamb in the desert, those who were ritually impure wanted to partake, thinking that the Paschal lamb was not a sacrifice that required ritual purity. When Moses told them it was a sacrifice, they thought that this pertained only to the new requirements of this year's offering, that eating the lamb didn't have the status of eating an offering. Thus, they suggested that pure priests sprinkle the blood and they'll eat the meat. Though they intended to eat the Paschal lamb, they didn't mention that detail. It's not clear in the Torah. When Jews have an opportunity to delight God with a personal sacrifice, everything else pales by comparison. It's not even worthy of mention. Jews are excited to perform a mitzvah because our good deeds delight God, and there's nothing a Jew enjoys more than being a delight to God. And again, just think about someone special in the world.
The only solution, because we didn't.
I'm sorry?
There was the only solution to give it for the reason they want to hear by God. Because if they will accept the request of these people, that okay, you can do it in the temple, they can give it to it. They will break the best rule, that the impure can also participate in everything.
Right, well, I don't think there was an option of breaking the rule, because those rules were there. I mean,
Yeah.
God can change the rules, but here the idea is that what would happen? So they can't. Sometimes he can't fulfill a mitzvah; it's just not possible.
Sure. Like I said,
If a person doesn't have a house, they can't put up a mezuzah.
well, like I said, God said, I'm making you personal for yourself, something
Yeah.
special for you to do something.
Yeah.
for it. Otherwise, can you imagine that? Okay, how many people don't die during this period of time because they want to do this?
So, is there any question? Yes.
Camping, you put mezuzah on your tent?
No. And that's okay. There are sometimes just in our situation, I can't do the Cohen's mitzvahs,
Not,
right?
not to blow Allah.
It's a mitzvah. One of the 613 mitzvahs is to divorce spouse
Yeah, under certain conditions.
under certain conditions.
Okay.
Thank God I'm not in those conditions. So a lot of them are conditional mitzvahs. The person just did a big mitzvah and buried a person needing burial and no one attending to them, so they couldn't have the Passover. So it's not like they did something wrong, but they wanted that opportunity.
I have a question.
Yes,
In the beginning, you said Miriam spoke negatively of Moses and she got leprosy for that.
correct. Lashon hara.
Who gave her leprosy?
It was not leprosy. They shouldn't have written leprosy, because leprosy is not. Wait a minute, God.
God.
Yeah, it's saras. Leprosy is not a proper translation of saras. In a Chabad thing, they shouldn't be translating it
That's
as
not the point.
leprosy. Yeah, but it's my point.
So God gave her disease.
There's a Torah principle that we had a few weeks ago in the Torah,
Yes, I remember.
that this saras, skin affliction, is a result of what we call lashon hara, negative speech. She spoke negatively. She was the great Miriam,
Mhm.
and she spoke negatively about her brother in a way for a good purpose, very understandable. But God expected more of people who are of such great spiritual stature, and therefore she was given a leprosy. Yes.
So the point I'm trying to make is, it sounds like an act of vengeance from God, and you always taught us God does not, or maybe a punishment.
Leprosy. Were you here the week we spoke about leprosy?
Yes.
About saras?
Yeah.
I don't think it's a punishment at all. It's a favor.
Oh.
If you or I
Baruch Hashem.
developed a pimple on our nose every time we offended someone's feelings, it would be a favor, because we probably don't even notice. And I look at the pimple and say, "Oy Gevalt, what did I do? I wasn't nice to Gennady, and now I have to go apologize." It was not a punishment. It was when they were more spiritually connected, their soul weakness showed itself in the body. And to us now, the connection is not clear. So we don't, so we can be blissfully blind to some of our soul imperfections. It's a gift to be able to see it.
Gotcha.
A question, so we don't do offerings anymore?
We don't do, well, we do personal, we don't do the animal offerings. We offer ourselves to God every day.
So that's the replacement.
Correct.
Okay.
And is in Torah thinking, it's anytime we offer ourselves, but actually the primary thing is actually prayer. When we when we try to come to feel close to God, and we disconnect from all the static of our lives, because it's hard to focus, and that's good. That's in place of the offerings.
So you can't serve lamb on Pesach
We don't.
as an offering,
Right. And as a matter of fact, it is
just as a
it
deal.
is traditional, not specifically not to serve lamb at the Seder, not so that people shouldn't think we brought an offering. That's when that's exactly when we switched to brisket.
So when Moshiach comes, we're back in.
Go back to lamb chops.
Yes, back to business.
All right. Any other questions? Have a great week.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Rabbi.